All right, chapter 22 is urbanization and sustainability. Try to go through this. Hopefully, I can get it done in just a couple of videos. Portland, Oregon runs throughout the entire chapter. Smart growth strategies. This is kind of where it starts and where it ends in terms of smart growth and how to take a city and allow it to grow sustainably. So one of the things that Portland does is encouraging clustered mixed-use neighborhoods of development. Mixed use basically means not only do you have residencies, but you also have maybe little markets, restaurants, other attractions to where people can walk fairly easily to those places within their own neighborhood. Any further travel, hopefully, ideally, there's some sort of mass transit options. Some of the big important ones are recycling programs, which about two-thirds of municipal solid waste. Portland is actually recycling. Farmers markets just means that you're buying locally grown products, fruits, vegetables, maybe locally produced items. And then they've had a big push to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the next 30, 40 years. They have different goals they've set. So the trends, there's a few questions on the test about the trends in urban areas. Urban areas continue to grow. That's one thing to remember. About 50% of people currently, a little over that, live in urban areas right now. Urban areas, the largest ones, make up only 3% of the land space, but they use up 75% of the resources. Those areas are projected to grow to about two-thirds of the world's population occupying those areas by the year 2050. Specifically in the less developed areas, less developed countries is where that growth will increase dramatically. So we kind of already mentioned this. Urban growth, the rate of increase, again, that's higher in less developed communities, less developed countries than it is in more developed countries. So three major trends in the world when it comes to the population. This stuff we've kind of already talked about, but proportion of global population living in urban areas is increasing. That's around the globe, developed versus less developed. It's just higher in less developed countries. The number and size of urban areas is mushrooming. So not only do you have more people, but it's also spreading out and occupying a larger land space. So you've got kind of two things that are making it challenging for cities to remain sustainable. The other big piece is in less developed countries, their infrastructure, while the city draws people because of the opportunities that it provides, poverty is becoming increasingly more urbanized, meaning that there's a lot of slums, that type of stuff, people who haven't quite gotten to the point where economically the city is benefiting them, and so they're living in very, what I would consider subpar, poor conditions. Megacities, I know your book says I think there's like 26 megacities, anything over 10 million people. The most recent data suggests 34 countries at that point. The top 20, we know that Tokyo, Yokohama, most populated city in the world, Jakarta, Indonesia, Delhi, Manila, Seoul, and kind of the connected cities, Shanghai, Karachi, Beijing, New York City. You can see we have a couple on that list. Mexico City, I don't know, if you look at the statistics from our textbook, it's like 19.5 million. So obviously not a huge amount of growth there, but still pretty substantial. All right, in the United States, you need to be familiar with how has our urban areas changed. So initially, people settled in the United States, and you had these little towns, so to speak, pop up that eventually became the hubs for economic development, industry, all these various things. And so people migrated to those cities to take advantage of those opportunities. After that period of time, we've now gone from these large cities that kept expanding, that eventually urban sprawl took over, and now we've got all these suburbs just outside of the city where there's the convenience of having a little bit more space and a little quieter area. And the automobile has allowed that to happen to where people can still drive into the city to work. The other thing is population initially was the northern part and the eastern part of the United States, and has now worked its way to the south and to the west, with some of the warmer beach areas being popular destinations. That's what this basically shows. Now, urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is Southern California is a prime example. So we live in a place where urban sprawl is rampant and running rampant, and we don't necessarily think about. It's great that we have all these highways and roads and stuff that connects everything, but we don't think about all that is being destroyed beneath those homes, beneath those roads. One of the reasons why urban sprawl is so rampant in Southern California is cars, automobiles make it easy to get from one place to another, and the infrastructure, the highway system that gets people there gives you a lot of options to get to the same place. We have a substantial amount of land. We have low gas prices, and it's tax laws encourage home ownership. So whereas in a city you might rent an apartment, something like that, you can move to the suburbs and actually own a home. State and local zoning laws we talked a little bit about today in class, a little bit about land use planning and zoning things for specific development. Those are fairly lax in a lot of places and really designated as multi-use, so it leaves the options open. And then just poor urban planning, poor land use planning by some cities, not necessarily planning ahead to deal with growth, rather kind of trying to deal with growth after the fact. Urban resource and environmental problems. A lot of cities waste a lot of resources. We talked about 3% of the land that those major urban areas make up use up 75% of the resources. What that means is we're wasting a lot. We're producing a lot of waste. There's a lot of pollution because you've got automobiles, you've got industry going on, and you've also got poverty because these cities can't keep up with growth. Advantages of urbanization: better healthcare, better opportunities for employment, better education, typically more culturally diverse and accepting. Typically women have a greater acceptance in those areas, better opportunity for education. They're sort of trending towards newer ideals than, say, the traditional rural areas outside of that city. So there's a lot of things that decrease with urbanization. So you have things like birth rate that goes down, infant mortality rate goes down, total fertility rate goes down because there's better opportunities for everyone. Makes a lot of these other things a little bit easier. Growing upward instead of outward preserves biodiversity. It's easier to recycle when everybody's in close confines and you can control it a little bit more. And then mass transportation, obviously, can be much more effective if people are more concentrated. Disadvantage: huge ecological footprint. We've already talked about that. Lack of green space, problems with water, especially if they're fairly arid regions. Then you end up taking water from other areas. Plus, you're destroying the land vegetation, which would otherwise help absorb the impact of storms, things like wetlands, that kind of stuff, filling them in, and so we end up with greater flooding in a lot of these areas. And then you get pollution, where you get poor air quality. Even in the United States, we have days in Southern California where air quality is really considered unhealthy, specifically in the summer when you're getting a lot of photochemical smog from all the pollution put out by vehicles. Noise pollution. The book mentions 85 decibels being the volume that a consistent noise at 85 decibels can cause permanent hearing damage. Some people that may be because of the occupation they're in. Other people may just because they live, in a place where the city is just noisy. The other side of that is if it's never quiet, it can drive some people crazy, just to the point where they get stressed out, higher blood pressure. They don't ever get that peace and quiet that a lot of people need or seek. Altered climate, the urban heat island. We talked about this idea that cities tend to be a little bit warmer because they absorb the heat with all that concrete, asphalt, those things, rather than it reflecting back towards space. Slums. One of the biggest issues with less developed countries is slums, areas that people migrate to, and that's where they start, and the slums keep growing because the cities don't quite have the infrastructure to handle all these people.